Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Street Fighter V. I mean, I'd like to tell you that it's the 5th entry in the mainline Street Fighter series, but that wouldn't even be right. Even if you didn't count all of the spin-offs, tie-ins, and all that sort of thing. We had, what, 1, 2, 3, 4 editions of Street Fighter 4? So, I don't know. Maybe not. But it is the next in the mainline series, the big entry, the big daddy of them all. When it comes to competitive fighting games, it is the mark by which all other fighters must measure themselves. The question is whether or not this particular game actually measures up to the series history, and more to the point, whether it measures up to the current competition in a very crowded space. The most crowded space, in fact, that we've ever had on PC. If you told me a few years ago that we'd have some serious fighting game competition on PC, I would have probably laughed you out of the room. But as it stands, companies have seen that actually fighting game players will happily use a PC, and there was a market there that was not previously being properly exploited. Now, of course, we have almost all of the mainline series on PC, and more coming every year. It's not okay anymore to release a slapdash port of a game, as we've seen in previous years with said fighting games. Plenty of them have not been particularly good. Is the PC port up to scratch when it comes to Street Fighter V? Well, I did a port report on it, and I can safely say that it is missing bits and pieces that I would like. I don't really have a great deal to add to the port report in terms of the way that the PC version works. The problems that I mentioned in the port report are still very much present. The only thing that I would add is that there is no option to turn VSync off, which could be a problem for those of you using G-Sync monitors. VSync, of course, also can add an element of delay and input lag to the whole game, which seems entirely unnecessary, and I'm not really sure why exactly they don't give the option to turn that off. Outside of that, the port report seems to still be accurate, unfortunately. Alright, let's talk about the actual game itself. Let's talk about how it works. Let's talk about what it has and what it has not brought to the table. Street Fighter V, as I mentioned, is the latest in the mainline iteration of the Street Fighter series. So it is a 1 versus 1 fighting game with a colorful cast of characters, and many of those you should be familiar with. Some of them you will not. They did go out of their way to introduce some new characters this time around, and they are omitting some notable folks in the 16-person opening lineup. Where's Dan, Capcom? Where did the Master of Psycho Power go? I don't know, but he isn't there, and he isn't in the DLC either, so I'm very upset about that. What is interesting to note about the character lineup is the fundamental change in business model that Capcom has claimed it will be following for the foreseeable future. No more will there be Super Street Fighter V, Ultra Street Fighter V, Street Fighter V Arcade Edition, all these roster update editions of the game. Everything will be added via individual DLC digitally, which makes sense in this day and age. What is highly unusual is that this DLC will in fact be earnable for free within the game using a currency called Fight Money. You don't have to buy it, which is incredibly surprising and actually quite generous, in my honest opinion. I have no problem paying for new characters. Of course, I mean, that's meaningful content, why wouldn't you? But in this case, they do allow you to unlock those characters for free if you play enough of the game. That, in my eyes, is a great business model and, frankly, should be a standard for the future of fighting games. One way or the other, though, you do see some people that you're quite familiar with, I would imagine, Ryu, Ken, and so on and so forth, and they've actually gone out of their way to really diversify those characters. A lot of the complaints from perhaps the more casual side of the audience have come along these lines, that characters like Ryu and Ken and Dan and Evil Ryu and Akuma and so on and so forth, they're all a little bit too similar to each other. You know, they're all Dragon Punch, Fireball, Spinning Kick, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, while that is true, there are, of course, a lot of subtleties and a lot of differences. The first thing that I'd say about Street Fighter V that it does really well is that it tries to accentuate the differences between these characters, whether it be actually changing their appearance. Ken is going through some very odd phases at the moment. He's probably looking into buying a large car. But one way or the other, even the fighters that are historically similar to each other in terms of style do tend to act quite differently in this version of the game, and a lot of that comes down to the so-called V-skill and V-trigger system. This is one of the new additions to the game mechanically that I will be going into fairly shortly, but before I do that, I need to address the elephant in the room, the big stomping elephant that is really dominating the online conversation when it comes to this game right now, and that is the idea of the value proposition. This game released unfinished. That is an objective fact. The list of features that this game is supposed to have includes caveats such as it will be here in a future update, or it will be here in March, or it will be coming at a later date. Now, bearing in mind that this is a full $60 release on the PC and PlayStation 4 platform, this has left quite a few people with a rather sour taste in their mouth. And I have to ask, can you actually blame them for that? Well, some people have tried to, and frankly, I think those people are quite silly. The concept of the value proposition is a very subjective one, and plenty of people are going to find different value in different things, whether it be features, whether it be character roster, whether it simply be a visual update. That's really up to you. That is down to your personal preferences. What do you want out of this game? Well, I can tell you what the game currently has, and I can also compare it to other games on the market, which is something that a lot of people seem to be completely ignoring when it comes to this argument. Part of the value proposition is not necessarily just what an individual wants from the game. It's what the other competitors in the same space also offer. It's a level of expectation that has been put in place by other members of the genre. There is a certain standard to be upheld, and when you happen to be the flag bearer of the genre, as you are if you happen to be the developer of Street Fighter V, there are certain expectations put upon you. And when those expectations are not met, then the obvious result to that will be disappointment. Let's look at what Street Fighter V is currently missing as of the 21st of February. It is missing a proper story mode, and by proper story mode I mean not a couple of fights strung together by, frankly, poorly drawn cutscenes. And I say poorly drawn because the art style simply doesn't match the in-game art style. I'm not really sure what's going on with it. It looks incredibly amateurish. The graphic novel-style cutscenes between these, frankly, meaningless fights are, in my opinion, poorly drawn and don't seem to match the overall art style and aesthetic of the game, which is why I don't really like them very much. These so-called story modes are incredibly short. If you skip all of the cutscenes, which you absolutely can, because they really don't add a lot of context to the game anyway, I was able to beat the Rashid story mode in 47 seconds. 47 seconds. Yes, that's a real thing. And I'm not even that good at fighting games. They're simply best of one against a fairly dumb AI opponent. It doesn't take much to work your way through that. The game is missing an arcade mode. It's missing a series of matches where you're able to play best of 3 against the AI. That's a basic mode that's been available for decades and frankly is expected in fighting games. It's a standard. You expect something along those lines, and Street Fighter has given you the impression that you should be expecting it, as has the rest of the genre. And Street Fighter V does not include it right now. What it does have is a survival mode, and while that is a relatively decent, if somewhat shallow mode, it doesn't include best of 3 options, and it's simply not an arcade mode. It has some gimmicks in it. You know, you don't necessarily want a system whereby you have to pay score in order to regenerate your health, or you have optional power-ups between levels. You know, those are nice little features for a survival mode, but they're not features of an arcade mode, and there is no arcade mode in Street Fighter V. And that is often where a lot of people go to just practice their skills and really just have a bunch of fun. You know, do a session in arcade mode, play against the AI, play maybe a new character, start to learn a few things. These are all good things, as far as I'm concerned, and Street Fighter V does not include the ability to actually partake in that. What it also lacks, which in this day and age, in my opinion, is not acceptable, is a proper training mode. The tutorial for this game is extremely threadbare. It teaches you some very, very basics with one character, and that is really about it. And it left me not really understanding some of the features of the game. Mostly because it really only lets you do them once. You know, a proper tutorial will drill it into you. You know, they'll force you to do the same thing multiple times. They will put you in different scenarios where that particular element is important so you can understand the context of why you should do that thing, not just how you should do that thing. And over the last few years, fighting games have understood and really started to tackle the problem of the high barrier to entry. Or more accurately, I suppose, the high barrier to competitive entry. It's very easy to pick up a fighting game and play it by just mashing the buttons. It's not as easy to understand how fighting games actually work and be any good at them. Now, fighting games over the last few years have realized that this is a problem and have gone out of their way to develop modes which will train you to play a fighting game properly. And these modes can be applied not just to that game, but to other games in the genre, because they all have shared characteristics. Recent examples of games that have included exceptionally good training modes include Killer Instinct, Skullgirls, most of the recent BlazBlue releases, and Guilty Gear Xrd. In fact, you really have to go out of your way to find a fighting game these days that does not include a reasonable training mode of some sort. But it turns out Street Fighter V is going to be the big fat exception to the rule by including almost no training of any description. Yes, you are able to fight against an AI dummy and have your commands be displayed and all that kind of thing, but you're not trained in how to play fighting games. You're not introduced to concepts. All of the games that I just mentioned do that. Even Street Fighter IV, which of course was released many, many years ago now, had a decent challenge mode whereby you could learn various combos for different characters. You may have noticed during this footage that there is a challenge button in Street Fighter V, and it's grayed out. Those challenges are not in the game yet. What Street Fighter V is offering you is a very slim package at its current price point and at its current state of release. It is offering you functional multiplayer. Mostly functional multiplayer. It is offering you a threadbare story mode with barely any value at all, and it's offering you a survival mode, and that is pretty much it. If that is all you want, great. Cool. If that's worth $60 for you, awesome. But it is important to note that compared to similar offerings in the genre, Street Fighter V offers very little when it comes to content. We're not talking even about quality versus quantity here, because when it comes to quality of fighting system, that is incredibly subjective. A lot of that comes down to personal preference. We are talking about features that are standard to this genre, features that, for the most part, Street Fighter IV helped standardize in the first place. We are talking about the idea that a full $60 release has a certain level of expectation attached to it as a result of the current state and competitive nature of this genre. And what I'm saying to you is that Street Fighter V is woefully behind its peers in that regard, and that is not an unfair criticism to make, no matter how much you will say that you enjoy the multiplayer, because I'm going to join you on that trek and say I love the multiplayer in this game. And I do not feel that my purchase was wasted, because I am primarily a multiplayer gamer and I already understand Street Fighter IV to a basic degree, which helped me learn Street Fighter V. But I'm not arrogant enough to believe that I am the only person on this planet, and there are plenty of other people that have very different views and gain very different amounts of value from different features found in these games. And when you lack those features, then the possibility of getting that value out of the game vastly decreases. The reason as to why the game is in its current state is because Capcom felt it was necessary to get the game out into people's hands before the Pro Tour really kicked off. They're putting a lot of money, as is Sony, into the esports scene of Street Fighter V this year. It's going to be a big deal. So in order for those people to practice, of course, and get involved and become interested in the scene, they need to have the game in hand. Now, in theory, this is not a bad thing. The problem is the way in which they released it. They released it as a full $60 release. It wasn't a tournament edition, a competitive edition, it wasn't a cut-priced edition, it wasn't early access. It was just a full-price box release. And yet it's lacking key features that you would expect from a full-priced boxed release. Now, you can tell me all you want that consumers should do their research, and you're right, they absolutely should. But I have to say that when it comes to transparency, unless you are really trawling around the Capcom blogs, that information is not necessarily readily available when it comes to going to purchase Street Fighter V. If I go to the store page for that game right now, is there anything there at all outside of the reviews below all of the official information that says this game is not complete? We have a bunch of stuff coming. Well, the only thing they have is more to come. Stay tuned for more announcements regarding new characters, stages, features, and more. It does not mention that it's missing an arcade mode, or a proper story mode, or anything along those lines. When it comes to point of sale, which as far as I'm concerned is the most important part of the purchasing process, Street Fighter V is not transparent and is not honest about its value proposition. That's the problem. That is the biggest problem. It's not that it's multiplayer only. There are plenty of games that are multiplayer only that I would recommend. The problem is that, compared to other things in the genre, it's not up to snuff, and it's full price, which to me is unreasonable. Okay, that is the elephant in the room out of the way. The question is, how does the damn thing actually play? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it is a very enjoyable fighting game, and it's addressed some of the issues that I had with Street Fighter IV, and made the game overall a little bit more dynamic. Now, the first thing that I would mention is, again, the diversification of the characters. I mentioned this earlier, but I'd like to reiterate it and talk a little bit about the V-skill system. So, in Street Fighter IV, you had what was called an Ultra Meter. Now, this Ultra Meter would gradually rise as you took damage and would allow you to unleash an Ultra Combo, which would hopefully give you some comeback potential. That's how it was really designed to be used. A lot of people didn't really like that. They felt that you shouldn't be rewarded for getting your ass handed to you, and the comebacks should not be reliant on such a singular feature. And I'd kind of agree with them on that. This time around, what we have is the V-bar. Now, the V-bar allows you to access various features, such as the V-reversal. When you're blocking and you are taking damage, you are able to do a V-reversal, which will allow you to usually get behind the opponent and counter-attack them. It's kind of like a combo breaker. There is also the V-skill. Now, V-skills are special moves, and they're usually accessed by hitting a couple of buttons. They're pretty easy to use, and they're unique per character. So it just fleshes out the overall set of moves that a character would have. For instance, the 3 standard moves of Ryu are Fireball, Dragon Punch, and that spinning kicky thing that sounds like a twisting bird kick, which is not at all true. But I always thought it used to sound that way back in the Street Fighter 2 era. Well, now Ryu also has a V-skill, which is a parry, which is very unique to him. So that further diversifies him as a fighter and differentiates him from similar fighters such as Ken. He also has his V-trigger, which will burn the entire V-gauge, and what it does is it gives your attack special properties, depending on which character you're playing. Going back to the example of Ryu for a second, his V-trigger electrifies some of his special moves. So you can charge up his Fireball, it also gains damage and stun, and his Dragon Punch gains some stun, a little bit more damage as well, and there's a little bit of invincibility on some of the frames and all that sort of thing. It basically affects different aspects of your character. Some of them actually have an attack built into them. For instance, Rashid, who is my main right now, will spawn a slowly moving whirlwind, which will move across the field, and it's something that you've got to think about and deal with, but it also allows for increased speed for Rashid, so he can close the distance with a much faster kick. And it really depends on which character you're playing as to how powerful these abilities are. Some of them are easily charged, like Rashid's. They only have 2 bars to charge up, some require more, and they are usually more powerful as a direct result. And the addition of this system has really helped to make each fighter feel truly unique. Now, there is criticism to be leveled, perhaps, at the number of fighters that are available on launch, 16. That is less than Street Fighter 4 at 17, and of course, less than other fighting games as well in the genre, although not all of them. But what I will say is that they all feel really different this time around. That is a problem that Street Fighter has struggled with, at least on a casual level, for quite a long time, and it certainly doesn't help when they keep bringing in different variants of the same character. As you may also have noticed, the Ultra meter is gone. However, you can do what's basically an Ultra combo, or I suppose you could just call it a Super combo at that point, which involves filling up your EX meter to allow you to use a so-called critical art, which is, for all intents and purposes, either a Super or an Ultra. It depends on how you really want to look at it. One big thing that's been removed from Street Fighter 4 is the focus system. I did not like focus, I'm going to be honest. It's mostly down to the reliance that most of the big combos had on the so-called focus attack dash cancel, which is something I could never bloody master, and it really limited my ability to play online because I simply couldn't do it. In Street Fighter 4, focus was a system whereby you were able to charge up an attack. Now, this attack had 3 stages of damage depending on how long you charged it, and it would also allow you to absorb a single hit while you were charging it. A fully charged focus would be a massive crumple attack, which would go through blocks and do damage, and it was used as part of the competitive scene when they discovered that you could cancel out of a focus, which allowed you to extend a combo, and that was actually key to a lot of the competitive aspect of the game. I was never able to master that, and I found it infuriating. And to me, focus kind of slowed the game down a little bit, and it wasn't really all that interesting. But I'm a very casual fighting game player, and I understand that from a competitive level, focus was probably pretty cool. That's now gone. It's been replaced by V-skills and V-trigger, which I feel are just more interesting, more dynamic. It's great that each character has something different that they can do with that system, as opposed to focus, where every character really interacted with that system in much the same manner, outside of being able to gain different combos through the FDAC. It should also be noted that Street Fighter V does go out of its way to make combos a bit easier to link together. From my research, it indicates that combos can be linked together in frames of 3 as opposed to single frame links. Now, you might be wondering what the hell I'm talking about there. I'm talking about executing a combo at just the right time within the space of a single frame, i.e. 1/60th of a second, as opposed to 3 frames, which is 1/20th of a second. The links are a lot easier to put together this time around, which does make the game friendlier to more casual players. It lowers the skill floor. Now, whether or not that means that the skill ceiling has also been lowered, that's something that we're going to have to find out over time as the game develops. But from my perspective, I like this. I really do. And it also makes me feel like I'm really landing my blows. There is this element of fighting games, and it's how meaty, I suppose, the combat feels. And you might think, well, how do you even quantify that? It's mostly just down to the way that characters interact with each other, and it's a mix of different things, such as particle effects, animations, and sound assets. It's also intrinsically tied into the way that the controls work and the responsiveness of the game. You can have all the big heavy attacks in the world that catapult enemies across the screen and through doors and windows and walls, but none of that really matters if the game doesn't feel like it responded accurately to your command right at that time. Thankfully, Street Fighter V does feel like it does that, and everything about the fighting system feels crunchy, it feels satisfying to use, and I enjoy it a great deal, more so than I did Street Fighter IV. That, to me, is my opinion of the core gameplay. I think the core gameplay is really, really solid, which to me is a reason to be further upset that the rest of the package and the value proposition simply isn't up to snuff. The game released with plenty of server problems, and it has not fixed them all yet. As you will probably note in the footage in the background, I actually had a fight whereby my ranked data wasn't saved, so the win didn't count. What's the point in even doing ranked play if I'm not gonna get the rewards for doing so? I should also point out that some of the matchmaking is a little bit suspect. I mean, I'm being matched up against people that are several leagues higher than me and are clearly much, much better. Now, in an ideal world, that shouldn't be happening. Maybe I just haven't played enough games, so the system hasn't figured out exactly where I should be yet. Maybe I was just playing at the wrong time for my region. That's also a possibility. But the fact of the matter is it happened, and I don't like that. The lost data and the server problems are inexcusable, frankly. I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. And there are also some minor nitpicks that I would have with the game when it comes to just wasting your time. For one thing, why is it, for instance, that when I get out of a multiplayer game and I go back into training with my fight request mode on, so it's ready to cue me into another fight as soon as it's actually found an opponent, that I have to go again through the loading screen and the animations for my training character? Like, I know my computer is much, much faster than this. This delay is artificial. This is not something that I need to have. I can understand that the delay might need to be there for the multiplayer, for syncing up the players, I get that, but for single player, why do I need to contact the server to do that? There's an awful lot of wasted time, and it all adds up. You might say, well, 8 seconds loading is nothing. Yeah, that's right, but let's take that 8 seconds of loading and now multiply it over 10 matches, 20 matches, 30 matches. Wait, you've got to do it twice. Every time you get out of a match, you also get the load. Every time you get into the match, you also get the load. And it adds up. It's one of those annoying technical issues that the game has, and from an aesthetic perspective, while I do rather like the art style, I have to say, the backgrounds for some of these stages are really quite disappointing. I mean, why are the characters in the background animated at 30 frames per second when everybody else is animated at 60? Did you think we wouldn't notice? I bloody well did. When it comes to observing 30 FPS sheep, I am a master of my craft. It's unnecessarily sloppy work as far as I'm concerned. There are some poor quality animations in the background, and I would expect better from Capcom. In my honest opinion, they make some of the best 3D generated stages that this genre has to offer, but frankly, it seems like lately, plenty of other companies have been surpassing them, and Street Fighter V is not a high watermark when it comes to their stage design, not at all. My conclusion on Street Fighter V is as follows. If you are buying this for multiplayer gaming, then for the most part, you're going to get what you are looking for. You're going to get a functional online system that seems to work relatively well, doesn't take too long to find a match most of the time, and seems to be relatively lag-free. That's great. The way that they've done the lag compensation in this game is almost seamless, and it seems to me, at least from my casual perspective, that the game is playing out fairly and I'm not being screwed over due to lag. That's awesome. I may be very well mistaken when it comes to the higher level stuff, but I have not personally had any noticeable lag problems in my playtime. That's great. The cross-platform play between PC and PlayStation 4 is also a welcome addition, because that means that the problem of having a smaller PC community evaporates. That's a wonderful thing, and I want to see more of that in upcoming fighting games. There is no reason not to have cross-platform play for fighting games since we're both using identical input devices. There is no advantage to being a PC gamer or a PlayStation 4 gamer when it comes to Street Fighter V, and that's exactly how it should be. With all of that said, There is no way in a million years that I would turn around and recommend this to you as a good $60 value proposition. It is missing far too many features, it is still buggy, it still has server problems, it is not a complete game. There are some multiplayer-only titles which I will turn around and tell you are worth buying, usually because they are exceptional in their craft, usually because they are purely focused on that multiplayer experience and there's actually no expectation of other features necessarily. There are games like Rainbow Six Siege where I'll turn around and say this is so unique and so damn good that yes, I can forgive the fact that it does not have a full campaign. This is not one of those games. Street Fighter V is a good fighting game. It may very well be a great fighting game, but it's in a competitive marketplace with other fighting games that are really good as well and have much more to offer for your money. That's the reality of it. You can't escape that. You can buy Street Fighter V for $60 right now, or you can go and buy Guilty Gear Xrd Sign for $30, which has a far larger and more fleshed out feature set. If you're after a single-player experience, you can go and pick up the Mortal Kombat Complete Edition for $20 and have a blast with that, even though its multiplayer community is essentially dead at this point. If you're looking for something more advanced, then the BlazBlue games are available again for $30. The next one is out in a week, by the way. Gone are the days when Street Fighter was the only player in the PC marketplace. When Street Fighter 4 first came out on PC, it was blazing a trail. There were so few fighting games available that it coming out in that state was amazing for PC gamers. But that was in 2009. This is 2016 and the marketplace has shifted, and we simply cannot ignore that fact. Unless you feel the need to jump into the multiplayer right the hell now, I would recommend waiting this out. The most annoying part of this whole debacle is that it could have very easily been avoided by Capcom simply releasing a cheaper version. Capcom decided to take the piss. They decided to release this version for full price without the complete feature set, because they knew people would have to buy into it if they wanted to get right in on the multiplayer on day one. They exploited their audience, as far as I'm concerned with this. And you know what? They probably hurt their brand long term, because the amount of negative press that Street Fighter V is getting is both justified and actually kind of upsetting, because this game's really fun. I love the fighting system. I'm going to be playing this hopefully for years. But they kneecapped themselves. Idiots! Good lord, it's really hard to defend that kind of business practice, and frankly, you shouldn't. Early access exists for a reason. Release a tournament edition, a multiplayer-only edition, anything. Anything other than $60 for an incomplete game. Street Fighter V, ladies and gentlemen, available for $60 on PC and PlayStation 4 or your regional equivalent. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then by all means, feel free to click the like button. If you disliked it and are a filthy Fang player, then feel free to click the dislike. I'll see you next time.